Deputy Pringle, please.
Thanks, Chairman. I'd like to thank Siobhan for her presentation. I suppose a few things just from the presentation. I suppose really the one thing we need to talk about, I suppose, is the activities of the factory ships off the west coast at the moment, and a lot of what comes down to what's happening out there as well is about the difficulty. Well, I don't know, is it difficulty or but the lack of will in terms of enforcement on the part of the Irish authorities, and then also I think what we've seen over the last year or so is a difficulty then in getting other member states to actually carry out and to recognise that enforcement activity as well. There was an incident last summer in the Irish Sea where a Danish vessel was boarded by the SFPA in the Navy and was judged to be fishing illegally or doing illegal activity and was allocated penalty points under the penalty point regime, and the Danish government refused to add those penalty points to the licence of the vessel, and then went out and got quota for the vessel a number of days after the penalty points had been allocated and said there was no problem. And then I think that vessel now has been reflagged and is operating under another state's flag. So that's a problem when you see at how we can enforce things. And when you look as well, like over the years, it's always been the case that the Irish Navy and the SFPA board 85% of the vessels they board at sea, I think, are Irish vessels, because basically they know what they can catch them at, whereas the rest of the ones, they don't bother, because the Spanish government won't tell you what the quota situation is in relation to Spanish vessels. The French government won't tell you in relation to French vessels, so they just don't bother looking at them because they don't have the information to be able to catch them. And that, I think, is a very real problem for us in terms of how we implement EU rules and regulations, because I think most fishermen would agree that we've always been the most vigorous and the most accurate at implementing the rules, but only against our own vessels and not getting the support or not achieving results against other member states' vessels as well. So that's something that I think needs to be addressed if we're going to be effective in terms of managing fishery stocks. Because if you look at the situation with the Margaret fishing off the west coast, according to our own SFPA, they only had quota for horse mackerel, but yet it's very difficult to catch clean horse mackerel at this time of the year. So they were obviously had to catch something else along with the horse mackerel, so they were either discarding it, which is breaking the law, or they were processing it on board and freezing it, which is also breaking the law. But there's a lack of will in terms of enforcement and in terms of actually investigating that. Now, in fairness to the SFPA, they said that the weather conditions off the west coast at the time were too dangerous to actually organise to board the vessel to inspect it, which may be true, but surely we could operate a system, and maybe Birdwatch Ireland could have a view on this, of where those vessels would be instructed to come in close to shore to a safe harbour where they could be inspected then in safe conditions. That's something that could be operated. And I think that is a big problem and a serious problem in trying to actually manage it and get fishermen to actually buy into actually conservation of the stocks as well. Because I see it. I'm from Killybegs, and I see it. Like our fleet will be tied up. Even the 23 boats that have the most of the quota will be tied up, and the Dutch factory vessels will be fishing away happily up the west coast. And and we actually have a bigger quota than the Dutch. So how do they manage it? That's the questions you have to ask. And the Margaret is on paper a Lithuanian vessel, but she's actually owned by a Dutch company. And the Dutch have bought up the German vessel companies and have German quota. They have Lithuanian quota. They have Dutch quota. They have English quota. So the big question that has to be answered is how other fleets can continue fishing when they've less quota than we have, and our fleets are tied up. It doesn't make sense. Just in relation to your presentation and a couple of questions in relation to what slide you showed there about how achieving MSY would actually lead to larger landings and stuff like that there, and more income for fishermen. Just wondering, does that report have any detail? And I know you can't do it for all different stocks that recover at different rates and everything like that there, but there must be an idea of how quickly you could achieve that, because there would be a huge economic impact on the fishing fleet to actually set out to do that in the first place. So I'm just wondering, the report must have looked at how long that would take in that as well, And then the other question I suppose relates to what I was saying earlier on there, that if we did adopt a policy of only achieving MSY and proposing that, like, what actual impact would that have at European level? Like, and are we just relying on the moral right of Ireland adopting this approach to actually persuade the Dutch and everybody else that's the way to go? And just in relation to the upcoming negotiations and the stock, the TACs and that there, just wondering, do you have any information as to what the likely uplifts will be in terms of the landing obligation, or is that all up for negotiation as well at the end of December? Because I think that's going to have a significant bearing on how whitefish fishermen particularly will be able to buy into the actual the process of trying to manage the stock sustainably in that. And in relation to the small-scale fisheries and the proposals within the common CFP for small scale, as I understand it, that's up to member states to implement, and it's not at a European level that will be implemented. So basically, it's up to Minister Coveney to decide to look at small-scale fisheries here in Ireland and give them actually a quota to allow them to fish. But there's no doubt that smaller-scale fisheries have less impact environmentally. They have less capacity to be able to catch large amounts of fish, and it probably a large economic impact on the small communities that depend on them. So, as I understand it, it is up to the member state to devise those policies and put them in place. And I'm just wondering what you think is the barriers to that happening here if it's not happening at this level. And just finally, just in relation to yourselves, you're part of a wider European lobbying network, as I understand it, and what are the rest of your fellow organisations or whatever across Europe, what are the kind of response are they getting within the different member states, and is it an uphill battle for everybody, or is there likely to be any real change take place? Thanks.